And that is exactly how most of us experienced the Toyota Supra, the gaming controller and Gran Turismo 2, or one of the many other games that this car featured on. And that's because in the early 2000s, Toyota put the Supra to rest. That's until now, after huge popular demand, Toyota has come out with another model and you're actually sitting inside it. So let's go outside and have a look. So here it is, the Mark V, or officially known as the A90 Toyota Supra. And first of all, let's just talk about the design. It is inspired heavily by the Mark IV, but it's a bit smaller. It only has 2 seats. What I felt they could have done was maybe round off the headlamps a bit better there, come up with a simpler bumper design. The rear is quite strong in Mark IV design, but I just feel it's kind of devoid from previous generation Supras. Obviously, Toyota, using BMW's platform, they wanted it to be a lot lighter, more compact, more focused, which is why it's now a 2-seater. It's also got a really cool double bubble roof, and it has an embedded spoiler on the boot. Obviously, I'm going to address the elephant in the room. This is based off the BMW Z4, but Toyota wants you to know that they had just about the same amount of say that BMW had in the platform, and they co-developed the platform rather than Toyota taking the platform from BMW. What's most important though is what is under the bonnet. So let's have a look. So yes, under the bonnet it is BMW's B58, although it has quite a big Toyota badge on it. It uses the same power output as the Z4 with 250 kilowatts and 500 Newton meters, but we are willing to bet that there's a little bit more than claimed because it feels more about 275. It's quite a bit quicker than the Z4, although it is lighter. Another thing you need to know about the engine bay is that there's a lot more room in here if you want to add a bigger cooling system. And that's something that they took note of when people were tuning the A80, the Mark IV, and that car was overheating. Another thing to point out are the holes here by the shock absorber housings. That is put there so you can add stability bars. So if you add more power to the car will experience more flex through the corners. If you add more torque, just put a stability bar and that'll prevent the body from twisting. You can also find these in the boot as well. That's the engine. Let's hop inside and see what the cabin's all about. So you don't actually drive it with one of these. You've got a conventional steering wheel and the cabin is pretty much straightforward car. Thankfully, Toyota have added a few things to make it feel a bit more unique. For example, there's this weird pillar line over here, which seems like an odd place until you close the door and you realize it creates a very focused and contained cabin. The gauges are also a unique graphic that you won't find in any other Toyota as well. My favorite thing that they added is the hooter, which sounds like it's actually from a Toyota Aygo. What's left to do next is obviously to drive the thing, so let's do it. So unfortunately, I've never had the pleasure of driving a Mark III or Mark IV Supra, but having read in-depth reviews of those two cars when they came out, it's safe to say that they weren't actually that great as standard. A lot of people found them very heavy, not as dynamic as the other Japanese counterparts like the RX-7 or the Honda NSX. But what gave them life was the fact that you could tune them so easily, and it was mainly because of that engine. And I think that's exactly why many people didn't really take to the Supra, because of how much it took from the Z4. Toyota made it clear that they had a lot to do with the development of this particular platform with the Z4 as well. And as I showed earlier, there's a lot of points around the car that make it very open to tuning. The big question with the Supra though is if it's truly separated from the BMW Z4 and if it's a true representation of Supras of past. Based on what I said earlier, I don't think it's a true representation of those cars because it's a two-seater coupe. It's a lot more focused than those cars are, quite a bit smaller, not as heavy. So for a lot of the parts, I think maybe it's a good thing that it's not like the Supra. The performance you get from it as standard is definitely sufficient. This car handles very well. It's quite fast off the line. Obviously people are going to want to tune it, but you'd be pretty satisfied on a daily basis by keeping this as standard. It is fantastic to drive. It is great fun. In-gear acceleration accelerates like it's twin turbo. Meanwhile, it's just using a twin scroll system. It doesn't suffer from a lot of lag. The transmission works very well. It's a very responsive car. But with a car like a Supra, it's very focused on driver engagement, and that's the whole Japanese philosophy altogether, and that's what's not coming very strongly through this car. And I say that like when you drive a Civic Type R, when you drive a Mazda MX-5, when you drive a Nissan 370Z, you can feel a very national sense in them. You can feel that they're very Japanese, and I think it's mainly because those cars have very traditional mechanical pieces of equipment in them. The transmission's still 6-speed manual in all of those cars. You still get a manual handbrake. The MX-5 and the 370Z, they're still naturally aspirated. Supra was never great as a naturally aspirated car. It always needed to be twin turbo, so I understand. I do think this should have probably been twin turbo just to satisfy the fans, but like I said, performance from the twin scroll is more than sufficient. And that's why it's a very difficult car for me, because at its price, you can also get an M2 Competition or Cayman S, and those are fantastic driver cars. Toyota wanted to do a modern interpretation on how it feels a Supra should be, and again, taking away the history, taking away the fact that it's based on a Z4 CLAR platform, it's a good car. It's a car you'll have fun with, it's a car you'll enjoy, it's a car that'll turn heads. You'll get those guys who'll say, it's a BMW, and they aren't 100% wrong, but in your heart you'll know that you have a Toyota Supra. So unfortunately, living up to the Supra name was always going to be a massive challenge. Yeah, I don't think this one quite gets it, but what I can say is it is a great car. It's a great sports car. It's very dynamic, it's very nimble, it's very driver focused, and I think anyone who gets behind the wheel of one will be quite content. If you are looking for a Supra, and if this is a Supra that you must have, I would recommend getting the Track Edition. It is still the Supra package, but you save a little bit at the bank. Overall, I think it should have been a little bit more Supra than they've made here, but Toyota is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and I would assume that they know more than I do.